There is something happening inside you right now that you have never been taught to see. Not something metaphorical, not something philosophical, something measurably, verifiably, scientifically real. A signal your body generates every single night in the dark, while your conscious mind has stepped aside and something older takes over. A signal so precise, so structured, so layered with information that the scientists who first detected it could barely believe what their instruments were showing them. A signal that moves through your nervous system, reorganizes your brain, rewrites the chemical landscape of your cells, and sends encoded instructions into the biological architecture of who you are becoming. And almost no one has told you what it actually is. You've been given the surface version. Sleep is rest. Sleep is recovery. Your body repairs itself while you sleep. That's the explanation most people received, and most people accepted it because it sounds complete. It sounds like the whole answer. It has the texture of settled knowledge, the kind of thing you stop questioning because it seems like the question has already been answered. But that surface explanation is the thinnest layer stretched over something that goes infinitely deeper. Beneath the idea that sleep is rest, there is a hidden architecture of signal transmission that your body has been using every night of your life to do something far more extraordinary than recover from the day. Beneath that architecture, there is a quantum-level process that ancient wisdom traditions described in their own language thousands of years before neuroscience had instruments sensitive enough to detect it. And beneath all of that, at the deepest layer this transmission will take you to tonight, there is a truth about what you are, what you actually are, beneath the surface of the person you think of as yourself. That changes everything about how you understand the life you are living. This is not a video about sleep hygiene. This is not about optimizing your sleep schedule or improving your REM cycles for productivity. Those are surface conversations, and we do not stop at the surface here. What this is an excavation. Layer by layer, we are going to dig beneath everything you think you know about what happens when you close your eyes, until we reach the hidden signal itself. And then we are going to follow that signal all the way down to where it touches the fabric of reality. Something in you already knows there is more here. That sense you have sometimes upon waking, that something significant happened in the night even though you can't name it. That feeling of having traveled somewhere, processed something, returned from somewhere just beyond the edge of articulation. That occasional morning where you wake up different, not rested exactly, but altered, as though something was adjusted in the night that you didn't consciously authorize. That sense is not imagination. It is accurate perception of a hidden process. And today, for the first time, you are going to see beneath it. Let's begin with the surface. Let's start with what you think you know, and let's be precise about it, because the first layer of any excavation requires you to understand exactly what you're standing on before you understand what's beneath it. The surface explanation of sleep goes something like this. After a day of activity, your body and brain accumulate what scientists call sleep pressure, a chemical fatigue that builds throughout waking hours, primarily driven by a molecule called adenosine that accumulates in the brain the longer you stay awake. When you sleep, adenosine is cleared. Your muscles repair microdamage from physical activity. Your immune system releases cytokines that fight infection and inflammation. Your brain consolidates memories, moving information from short-term storage into long-term structures. And then you wake up and you do it again. This explanation is accurate. Everything in it is real. The adenosine clearance is real. The muscle repair is real. The memory consolidation is real. This is not a story that needs to be debunked. But here is what makes it a surface explanation rather than the whole truth. It describes what is happening without describing what is doing it, or why, or at what level of reality the process is actually occurring. It gives you the outcome without showing you the mechanism beneath the outcome. It tells you the surface of the river without showing you the current running beneath it. And the current, the actual mechanism driving what happens while you sleep, is where this gets extraordinary. Peel back that surface understanding and look at what's underneath. Beneath the familiar story of rest and recovery, there is a system of biological signal transmission so sophisticated that neuroscientists spent decades trying to map it and are still discovering new layers. It begins approximately 90 minutes after you fall asleep, when your brain enters what we call slow wave sleep, a state characterized by large synchronized electrical waves moving across the cortex in slow rolling patterns. These waves are not random. They are not simply the noise of a quieting brain. They are organized, structured. They carry information. The slow oscillation of deep sleep, that rhythmic rise and fall of electrical activity across the entire cortex, functions as a carrier wave, like a radio signal that carries encoded audio information on top of a base frequency. The slow oscillation of deep sleep carries nested within it two other rhythms, each operating at a different frequency, each encoding different kinds of information. Sleep spindles, which are brief bursts of faster electrical activity, 12 to 15 cycles per second, ride on the peaks of the slow oscillation like surfers on a wave, and nested within those spindles at an even faster frequency are sharp wave ripples generated in the hippocampus, the brain's memory indexing structure, that fire in precise coordination with the peaks of both the slow oscillation and the spindles. This three-layer nested signal, slow oscillation, spindle, ripple, is one of the most precisely timed biological events in the human body. The coordination required for these three rhythms to synchronize is extraordinary. The brain is not resting, the brain is conducting. And what is it conducting? What is the content of this signal? Here is where the first veil lifts. The sharp wave ripples generated in the hippocampus during deep sleep are replaying the events of your day, but not in any simple recording and playback sense. What the hippocampus is doing during these ripples is more like editing than replaying. It is selecting specific moments, specific patterns of neural activation from your waking experience, and replaying them at 20 to 30 times their original speed, compressed, accelerated, stripped of their sensory detail and reduced to their essential pattern. It is extracting the structure from the experience, removing the noise, and sending that compressed structural information outward into the cortex through the carrier system of the slow oscillation and the spindles. The cortex receives this information and integrates it into its existing architecture, literally rewiring the connections between neurons, strengthening some pathways, weakening others, building new associations between concepts that were previously stored in separate regions. This is not metaphorical rewiring. This is physical, measurable restructuring of the neural network that constitutes your model of reality. While you sleep, your brain is literally rewriting itself, and it is using a hidden signal to do it. If this transmission is reaching a layer in you that the surface world rarely touches, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because every transmission on this channel goes deeper beneath the surface of what you thought you knew, and you won't want to miss where this excavation leads next. But there's a layer beneath that. Because what I've just described, the nested oscillation system, the hippocampal replay, the cortical integration, is still a mechanical description. It tells you what is happening at the level of measurable electrical activity. It doesn't tell you what is happening at the level of information itself. It doesn't tell you what this signal is actually transmitting at the level of meaning rather than mechanism. To see that layer, we need to go deeper into the science. And this is where it starts to get genuinely extraordinary. In 2019, researchers at the University of Rochester published findings that had been building for several years. Findings about a system in the brain that had gone completely undetected until 2012, not because it wasn't there, but because it only activates during sleep. This system is called the glymphatic system, a network of channels that surrounds the brain's blood vessels and, during deep sleep, expands dramatically, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow through the brain tissue at a rate that is almost entirely absent during waking hours. During sleep, the brain cells actually shrink by approximately 60%, creating space for this fluid to flow through, carrying with it the metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking consciousness, including, critically, the proteins that when they accumulate are associated with neurological disease. But the glymphatic system is not just a cleaning system, it is also a communication system. The cerebrospinal fluid that flows through this network during sleep carries with it signaling molecules, hormones, neuropeptides, growth factors that are distributed throughout the brain tissue in patterns that are not random. The distribution of these molecules follows the architecture of the glymphatic channels, which means that the chemical signaling environment of the entire brain is being reset and reconfigured during sleep in a way that is impossible during waking hours when the system is essentially shut down. Your brain has a secondary communication network that only comes online when you're unconscious. A hidden channel. A signal pathway that is inaccessible to your waking awareness. Feel what shifts when you see that layer. The brain you experience yourself as having, the brain that processes your waking perceptions, generates your thoughts, constructs your sense of who you are, is not the only brain that is operating. There is a parallel system, a hidden architecture that activates in the absence of your conscious awareness and performs operations on your neural structure that your waking mind never participates in and cannot directly observe. This is not a metaphor. This is anatomy, and it gets deeper still. The glymphatic system's activity during sleep is not uniform throughout the night. It is patterned. It follows the same slow oscillation rhythm that drives the nested signal system we described earlier. The flow of cerebrospinal fluid through the brain tissue pulses in synchrony with the slow oscillations of deep sleep, meaning the chemical reconfiguration of the brain's signaling environment is coordinated with the electrical replay and integration of experiential information. The cleaning and the coding are happening simultaneously, in rhythm, as part of a single integrated process. Your brain, during deep sleep, is simultaneously clearing the residue of the day, replaying and compressing its experiential content, integrating that content into long-term structural changes, and redistributing the chemical environment that determines how the entire system will respond to experience when it comes back online. This is not rest. This is renovation. This is a nightly rebuilding of the instrument through which you experience reality. Now let's go deeper. Because what I've described so far is still operating at the level of classical biology, neurons, electrical signals, chemical gradients. These are real and important, but they are still surface-level descriptions of a process that, when you look beneath them, reveals something that connects this hidden nightly signal to the deepest questions about the nature of reality itself. Quantum biology is a field that emerged in the early 21st century from an uncomfortable observation. Some biological processes are too fast, too precise, and too efficient to be explained by classical chemistry alone. The most famous example is photosynthesis, where plants transfer energy from light to chemical storage with an efficiency that classical physics says should be impossible, and where experiments have shown that quantum coherence, the ability of quantum systems to exist in multiple states simultaneously, plays a measurable role in the process. But photosynthesis is not the only place quantum effects appear in biology. In the last 2 decades, evidence has accumulated for quantum processes in enzyme catalysis, in the magnetic navigation of birds, in the sense of smell, and, most relevantly to what we are exploring tonight, in the firing patterns of neurons themselves. The neuron, at the surface level of description, is an electrochemical switch. It receives signals from other neurons through its dendrites, integrates those signals, and when the integrated signal crosses a threshold, it fires, sending an electrical pulse down its axon to the next neuron in the network. This is the classical description, and it is accurate as far as it goes. But beneath the classical description, at the level of the molecular machinery that drives the electrochemical process, quantum effects are not only possible, they appear to be functional. The ion channels that control the flow of charged particles across the neuron's membrane, the molecular gates that determine whether and when a neuron fires, operate at a scale where quantum tunneling, quantum superposition, and quantum entanglement are not merely theoretical possibilities, but measurable realities. And during sleep, during the specific state of slow-wave sleep, when the nested signal system is most active. The conditions inside neurons change in ways that may dramatically alter the degree to which quantum effects influence neural processing. The temperature of the brain decreases slightly during deep sleep. The metabolic activity of individual neurons drops, reducing the thermal noise that tends to decohere quantum states. The synchronized, rhythmic nature of slow-wave sleep creates conditions of electromagnetic coherence across large populations of neurons that simply do not exist during waking consciousness. In other words, sleep may be the condition under which your brain is most capable of quantum-level information processing. The hidden signal your body sends while you sleep may not be operating only at the classical level of electrical and chemical activity. It may be operating at the quantum level, at the level where the boundary between possibility and actuality is not yet fixed, at the level where the observer and the observed are not yet separate. This is where the veil lifts into something that should change everything. Quantum mechanics, at its core, discovered something beneath the surface of matter that rewrote the fundamental description of reality. Before quantum mechanics, the classical physics worldview held that the universe was made of objects, particles with definite positions, definite velocities, definite properties that existed independently of whether anyone was observing them. Reality was solid, fixed, determined. The universe was a machine made of stuff, and consciousness was an epiphenomenon, a passenger in the machine, not a participant in its operation. Quantum mechanics dismantled this picture completely. What physicists found beneath the surface of matter was not smaller pieces of stuff. What they found was a field of probability, a quantum field in which particles do not have definite properties until they are measured. Until the moment of measurement, a quantum system exists in a superposition of all its possible states simultaneously. The act of observation, the interaction between the quantum system and a measuring apparatus, collapses this superposition into a single definite outcome. Reality, at the quantum level, is not fixed until it is observed. This is not interpretation. This is not philosophy. This is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics predicts, and it is what every experiment designed to test it has confirmed. The quantum world is fundamentally probabilistic, fundamentally relational, and fundamentally dependent on the act of observation in a way that classical physics never was. Now, here is the layer that changes everything. If the brain, during sleep, is operating in conditions that enhance quantum-level processing, if the hidden signal of sleep is not just electrical and chemical, but quantum in nature, then what is happening during sleep is not merely the reorganization of classical information. It is the collapse of quantum possibility into biological reality. It is the process by which the quantum field of potential that underlies your neural architecture is being sampled, and from that sampling, a new configuration of the possible is being selected and instantiated in the physical structure of your brain. Your brain, while you sleep, may be doing what quantum mechanics says all measurement does, collapsing possibility into actuality, drawing from the field of what could be and writing it into the structure of what is. And this means that the reality you wake up into The reality you experience tomorrow, filtered through the neural architecture that was rebuilt tonight, is not simply a continuation of the reality you went to sleep in. It is a new instantiation, a new collapse, a new selection from the quantum field of what your experience could be. The hidden signal of sleep is not just reorganizing your memories, it is literally selecting the version of reality you will inhabit tomorrow. That's not belief. That's what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter, applied to the biological system that generates your experience of reality. I want to pause here and ask you something. Has there been a moment in your own life, a morning you woke up and something had shifted, a threshold you crossed in the night that you couldn't explain, where the hidden layer broke through and showed itself? Drop it in the comments, not the analysis of it, the raw experience. What you sensed, what dissolved, what became visible. Let's build a map of this together. Now let's go deeper still. Because beneath the quantum mechanics, there is an older layer. A layer that was mapped not with instruments but with awareness. A layer that ancient wisdom traditions described in their own language, with their own precision, thousands of years before neuroscience had the tools to see what they were pointing at. Let me take you there, across traditions that developed independently. In ancient Egypt, in the Vedic civilization of the Indian subcontinent, in the shamanic cultures of the Americas, in the mystery schools of ancient Greece, in the Taoist traditions of China, there is a remarkably consistent description of what happens during sleep. Not consistent in the superficial sense of sharing the same metaphors, but consistent in a deeper sense, consistent in the structure of what they describe. In the Vedic tradition, the state of deep dreamless sleep, called sushupti, was considered not the absence of consciousness, but the return of individual consciousness to its source. The Mandukya Upanishad, one of the oldest Vedic texts, describes 4 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and a 4th state called turiya, the witnessing awareness that underlies all 3. In deep sleep, the individual self dissolves into what the tradition calls prajna, a state of unified, undifferentiated awareness that is described as being in direct contact with the ground of being itself. The Vedic sages were not describing unconsciousness. They were describing a state in which the individual awareness merges with the universal field from which individual awareness arises. In the ancient Egyptian tradition, the concept of the ba, often translated as the soul, but more accurately understood as the animating intelligence of a person, was described as leaving the body during sleep and traveling through a realm called the duat, a hidden dimension of reality that existed beneath the visible world. The duat was not simply the land of the dead. It was the hidden layer of reality that generated the visible world, the source field from which manifest reality emerged. The Ba's nightly journey through the duat was understood as a process of renewal, of contact with the generative ground of existence, without which the waking self would gradually lose its vitality and coherence. In the shamanic traditions of indigenous cultures across multiple continents, the dream state and the state of deep sleep were understood as the condition in which the shaman or the dreamer could access the spirit world, not a supernatural realm separate from physical reality, but the hidden layer of reality that underlies and generates the physical. The shamanic cosmology typically described reality as having multiple layers. The ordinary world of waking experience, the lower world of deep roots and ancient patterns, the upper world of higher intelligences and future possibilities, and the state of sleep or trance was the condition in which the practitioner could move between these layers, bringing information from the hidden layers back into the ordinary world. In the Taoist tradition, the concept of Wu Wei, effortless action in harmony with the Tao, was understood to be most accessible in states of reduced conscious interference, including sleep. The Tao itself, the underlying principle of reality, was described as operating most powerfully in the absence of the deliberate, grasping quality of waking consciousness. The Taoist sage Zhuangzi famously described a dream in which he was a butterfly, and upon waking, asked whether he was a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly, now dreaming of being a man. Not as a riddle, but as a genuine inquiry into the layered nature of reality and identity. These traditions were not describing the same thing in the same language. They were describing the same hidden layer of reality in different languages, each tradition developing its own vocabulary for a territory that their practitioners had mapped through direct experience rather than instrumentation. And what they were describing, the return to source, the journey through the hidden dimension, the access to the generative ground of reality, is, at a structural level, precisely what quantum biology and neuroscience are now beginning to describe in their own language. The hidden signal of sleep is the mechanism by which your biological system makes contact with the quantum field that underlies your experience of reality. The ancient traditions described this contact as the return of the individual to the universal. Modern science is beginning to describe it as the collapse of quantum superposition into biological structure. Different languages. The same hidden layer, hidden in plain sight, in the hours you thought you were simply unconscious. Now let me show you something. Let me take you into a parable, because some truths reach you more fully through story than through argument. Some hidden layers can only be entered through the door of narrative. There was a woman named Sarah who worked as a cartographer. She made maps, not digital maps, not satellite imagery, hand-drawn maps of the kind that require you to walk the territory yourself, to feel the land beneath your feet, to notice the way light falls at different hours and the way water moves through the landscape. Sarah was extraordinarily good at this work, and she was proud of the maps she made, because they were precise and because people trusted them. For many years, Sarah worked only during the day. She would rise before dawn, be in the field by first light, work through the hours of daylight, and return home at dusk. She documented everything she could see, every road, every building, every visible landmark. Her maps were comprehensive, and she believed they were complete. Then one winter, she was commissioned to map a region of forest that was said to contain something unusual. A system of underground rivers that had never been properly documented. The people who lived near this forest spoke of the rivers with a kind of reverence that Sarah found interesting, but not particularly relevant to her work. She was a map maker. She mapped what could be seen. She spent 3 weeks in the forest. She documented everything visible with her usual precision. The trees, the paths, the surface streams. She found no evidence of underground rivers. She concluded that the stories were probably mythology, the kind of thing local people generate about places that feel significant to them. She finished her map and prepared to leave. On her last night in the forest, exhausted from weeks of fieldwork, she fell into an unusually deep sleep. And in that sleep, something happened that she later struggled to describe in any language that felt adequate to the experience. She described it as becoming the forest, not dreaming about the forest, becoming it. She felt, from within the sleep, the movement of water beneath the ground. She felt it as clearly as she felt her own heartbeat, a slow, deep pulsing of water through channels far below the surface, following pathways that the surface landscape gave no indication of. She felt the roots of the oldest trees reaching down into this hidden water. She felt the way the surface streams were fed not only by rain, but by this hidden source rising through the soil in places she had walked over without knowing what was beneath her feet. She woke before dawn, and she sat with what had happened. She was a scientist, a map maker. She did not put experiences like this in her maps. She documented what could be seen, but she stayed one more day. She went back into the forest with a different kind of attention, not looking for what was visible, but listening for what was beneath the visible. And she began to find the signs, the specific vegetation patterns that indicate subsurface water, the subtle depressions in the ground where hidden channels had created slight collapses in the soil above them, the temperature differentials she could feel at her feet in certain areas where cold water ran close to the surface. Signs she had walked over for 3 weeks without registering because she had not been looking for them. She added the underground rivers to her map. She documented their likely paths based on what the surface was telling her now that she knew to look. When hydrologists later came to verify her work, they found that her map of the underground river system was more accurate than any survey they had done with instruments. She had not mapped the underground rivers by looking at them. She had mapped them by sleeping in the forest and letting the hidden signal of the land come through. For the rest of her life, Sarah made maps differently. She still worked by day, still documented everything visible with her usual precision. But she always spent at least one night in the territory she was mapping, and she always paid attention to what came through in the deep hours of sleep. Not as superstition, not as mysticism, but as a methodology, a way of accessing the layer of information that the waking, analytical mind, focused on what was visible, systematically missed. She called this practice listening to the deep ground, and the maps she made from it were the most accurate maps anyone had ever seen of those territories. You have been mapping your reality from the surface. The hidden signal of your sleep has been trying to show you the underground rivers. Tonight, you begin to listen to the deep ground. Now let's go deeper. Because we've established the hidden signal at the level of neuroscience, at the level of quantum biology, and at the level of ancient wisdom. But we haven't yet talked about the most personal layer, the layer that is most directly relevant to you, to your life, to the reality you are actually living. What does this hidden signal actually do to the version of reality you experience? Here is what the research shows, and here is why it matters more than almost anything else you will learn about the relationship between your biology and your experience. Your experience of reality, everything you perceive, everything you feel, everything you believe to be true about yourself and the world, is generated by your brain. Not in the reductive sense that it's all in your head, and therefore not real. In the precise sense that your brain is the instrument through which reality is transduced into experience, and the architecture of that instrument determines the nature of what you experience. The same external event can generate completely different experiences in different brains, not because the event is different, but because the instruments transducing it are different. This is not controversial. This is basic neuroscience. What is less commonly understood is the degree to which the architecture of your brain, the specific pattern of connections, the specific weighting of different neural pathways, the specific sensitivity of different systems, is not fixed. It is not the permanent hardware you were born with and must work around. It is dynamic. It is continuously being remodeled. And the primary site of that remodeling is sleep. The process called synaptic homeostasis, the nighttime reset of synaptic strength that occurs during slow-wave sleep, is one of the most important and least discussed processes in all of neurobiology. During waking hours, your brain learns through a process called long-term potentiation. The connections between neurons that fire together are strengthened, and this strengthening encodes what you've experienced. This is how learning works at the neural level. But there is a problem with this process if it runs unchecked. The brain cannot keep strengthening every connection indefinitely. If every experience simply added more strength to existing connections, the system would eventually saturate. The signal-to-noise ratio would collapse. Everything would be equally weighted, and nothing would stand out. Slow-wave sleep solves this problem. During the slow oscillations of deep sleep, synaptic connections are globally downscaled, reduced across the board, in a process that is selective rather than random. The connections that were most strongly activated during the day, the ones that encode the most significant experiences, the most important learning, the most emotionally resonant events, are preserved at a proportionally higher level than connections that were weakly activated. The result is not a simple reduction in overall synaptic strength, but a refinement of the signal-to-noise ratio. What was important becomes relatively more prominent. What was noise is cleared away. Your brain is not just consolidating memories during sleep. It is editing your model of reality. It is deciding, through a process you cannot consciously direct, what gets to be signal and what gets to be noise. It is determining what will stand out in your experience of tomorrow and what will fade into the background. And here is where this becomes directly relevant to the question of how the hidden signal rewires your reality. The editing process that occurs during sleep does not operate in isolation from your emotional state, your beliefs, your habitual patterns of attention. The synaptic connections that are most strongly activated during the day, and therefore most preserved through the nighttime downscaling, are not simply the connections encoding the most recent events. They are the connections that are most deeply embedded in your existing neural architecture. The patterns that have been reinforced most often over the longest period of time. The beliefs, the self-concepts, the interpretive frameworks that constitute your habitual way of making sense of experience. In other words, the editing process of sleep tends to preserve and reinforce your existing model of reality. Not because the system is designed to trap you, but because the system is designed to maintain coherence, to ensure that your model of reality remains internally consistent from day to day. The brain is a prediction machine, and it values the predictive accuracy of its existing model highly enough to protect it through the nightly editing process. This is why your experience of reality tends to be so stable over time. Not because reality itself is fixed, but because the instrument through which you experience reality is being nightly reinforced in its existing configuration. But here is the layer beneath that. Here is where the hidden signal becomes not just interesting, but transformative. The editing process of sleep is not entirely conservative. It is not simply reinforcing what already exists. Embedded within the same slow-wave sleep process that preserves existing neural architecture, there is a parallel process of novel connection formation, the creation of new associations between previously unconnected pieces of information. This is the process that underlies what we call insight, the sudden understanding that comes in the night, the solution to a problem that appears upon waking, the creative connection that wasn't visible during the day. Research on insight and sleep has shown that the probability of making a novel connection between pieces of information increases dramatically after a period of sleep, compared to the same period of waking time. The brain, during sleep, is not just replaying and reinforcing existing patterns. It is searching the space of possible connections, sampling the landscape of what could be associated with what, and finding connections that the waking, focused, goal-directed mind missed because it was too busy following the paths it already knew. The hidden signal of sleep is simultaneously a conserving force and a creative force. It preserves the architecture of what you know while searching the space of what you don't yet know. It maintains the coherence of your existing model of reality while introducing the novel connections that will eventually change that model. This is the mechanism of genuine transformation, not the surface-level transformation of changing your behavior or your circumstances, but the deep transformation of changing the instrument through which you experience reality, changing what you see, what you feel, what you believe to be possible, at the level of the neural architecture that generates your experience. And this process is happening every night, without your conscious participation, without your awareness, through a signal so hidden that most people live their entire lives without knowing it exists. Now let's go to the layer that may be the most extraordinary of all. There is a specific period of sleep, a period that most people know the name of, but almost no one understands the depth of. That is not simply a phase of sleep, but a distinct state of consciousness, with properties that, when examined carefully, suggest something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the stage most associated with vivid dreaming. The surface description of REM sleep goes something like this. It's the stage where you dream, your eyes move rapidly beneath your closed lids, your body is temporarily paralyzed, and your brain shows activity patterns similar to waking consciousness. This is accurate, but it is, again, the thinnest surface of what is actually happening. Peel back that description and look at what's underneath. During REM sleep, the neurochemical environment of the brain undergoes a transformation that has no parallel in any other state of consciousness. The two primary modulatory neurotransmitters that dominate waking consciousness, norepinephrine and serotonin, are almost completely shut off. These neurotransmitters, in waking life, perform a critical function. They maintain the stability of your existing neural patterns. They are, in a sense, the chemical substrate of your habitual self, the neurochemical signature of the version of reality you've been trained to perceive. During REM sleep, with these stabilizing neurotransmitters offline, the brain enters a state of extraordinary plasticity. The normal constraints on neural association are released. Connections that would be suppressed during waking consciousness because they don't fit the existing model, because they cross the boundaries between normally separate domains, because they violate the categories that the waking mind maintains, become possible. The brain, freed from the chemical enforcement of its own habitual patterns, can explore connections that the waking mind cannot access. At the same time, during REM sleep, a different neurotransmitter surges to levels higher than at any other point in the sleep-wake cycle. Acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter most associated with learning, with neural plasticity, with the formation of new connections. Its surge during REM sleep is not coincidental. It is the chemical signal that enables the extraordinary associative freedom of the REM state to be encoded, to leave a lasting trace in the neural architecture rather than simply dissolving when the state ends. During REM sleep, the brain is flooded with the chemical of learning while being freed from the chemical constraints of its existing model. It is in the optimal state for creating new connections while simultaneously being in the optimal state for encoding those connections permanently. This is the hidden signal at its most powerful. This is the mechanism by which sleep does not merely consolidate what you already know, but genuinely expands the space of what you can know, what you can perceive, what you can understand, what you can experience as possible. And here is the layer beneath that. The content of REM dreaming, the seemingly random, often bizarre, emotionally intense imagery of dream experience, is not random. Research on dream content has consistently shown that dreams are not replays of waking experience. They are recombinations. They take elements from different experiences, different time periods, different emotional contexts, and combine them in novel ways that the waking mind would not generate. Dreams are the phenomenological experience of the brain performing its most radical associative operations, the subjective side of the process by which the neural architecture is being most dramatically restructured. The story your brain tells during REM sleep, the dream, is a window into the hidden signal. It is the surface appearance of the deepest reorganization. And this means that what you dream is not simply the noise of a sleeping brain. It is the signal itself, translated into narrative form, showing you the connections that are being made, the patterns that are being recognized, the new configurations of meaning that are being written into your neural architecture. The ancient traditions understood this. The dream was never considered noise in any wisdom tradition that took consciousness seriously. In ancient Egypt, the practice of dream incubation, sleeping in sacred spaces in order to receive guidance through dreams, was a formalized spiritual practice that lasted for thousands of years. In the Vedic tradition, the dream state was considered a distinct plane of consciousness with its own valid form of knowledge. In indigenous traditions worldwide, the dream was the primary medium through which the hidden layer of reality communicated with waking consciousness. They were not being superstitious, they were being precise. They were recognizing through direct experience and systematic practice what neuroscience is now confirming through instrumentation. The dream state is a high-signal state. It is the state in which the hidden architecture of your consciousness is most actively being restructured, and the dream itself is the signal of that restructuring, visible to the dreaming awareness. Now let's talk about what you can actually do with this, because this transmission is not simply about understanding what happens while you sleep. It is about recognizing the hidden signal, learning to work with it consciously, and using the extraordinary nightly process of neural restructuring to actively participate in the evolution of the reality you experience. Here is the practice. Here is the embodied layer of this transmission. The hidden signal of sleep is most powerfully influenced not by what you do during sleep, but by what you do in the hours immediately before sleep and in the first minutes after waking. These are the two threshold moments, the descent into the hidden signal and the return from it. And they are the points at which your conscious awareness can most directly communicate with the process that operates beneath it. In the hours before sleep, your brain begins a gradual transition from the high-frequency, high norepinephrine state of waking consciousness toward the slow-wave state of early sleep. During this transition, the brain's sensitivity to emotional and experiential input is elevated. The events of the evening, what you watch, what you think about, what you feel, what you focus your attention on, are weighted more heavily in the night's editing process than events from earlier in the day. This is not anecdotal. Research on memory consolidation has shown that emotional experiences in the hours before sleep are disproportionately represented in the hippocampal replay of slow-wave sleep. This means that the quality of your attention in the hours before sleep is not simply a matter of evening comfort or wind-down routine. It is a direct input into the hidden signal. What you bring to the threshold of sleep is what the signal has to work with. The emotional tone, the dominant thoughts, the quality of awareness you carry into sleep are the raw material that the nightly editing process will work with, amplify, and integrate into your neural architecture. Most people bring the accumulated anxiety, stimulation, and unresolved tension of the day to the threshold of sleep. They bring the noise of the surface world, the news, the screens, the unfinished business, the low-grade worry, and they hand that noise to the hidden signal, which then does its best to work with it. The result is a nightly editing process that reinforces the patterns of anxiety, reactivity, and surface-level engagement that characterize the day. But you can change what you bring to the threshold. You can become intentional about the raw material you hand to the hidden signal. This is the practice. In the 30 to 60 minutes before you sleep, create a deliberate transition, not a wind-down routine in the productivity optimization sense, but a genuine shift in the quality of your awareness. Move your attention away from the surface of the day and toward the depth beneath it. This can take many forms, and the specific form matters less than the quality of attention it generates. You might spend this time in deliberate reflection, not reviewing the day's events in the mode of analysis or judgment, but sitting with the day in the mode of witnessing. Letting the events of the day pass through your awareness without grasping at them or pushing them away. Allowing what was significant to surface naturally without forcing it. This is not processing in the psychological sense. It is more like letting the sediment settle, allowing the meaningful to separate from the noise before you hand both to the hidden signal. You might spend this time in deliberate gratitude, not as a positive thinking exercise, but as a genuine redirection of attention toward what was real and valuable in the day. The neural research on gratitude practice shows that it activates the same dopaminergic pathways associated with reward learning, which means that bringing a genuine quality of appreciation to the threshold of sleep literally changes the emotional weighting of the experiences that the hidden signal will process. You might spend this time in deliberate intention, not setting goals or making plans, but holding a genuine question. A real question about something you want to understand, something you're navigating, something you want to see more clearly. The research on problem solving and sleep consistently shows that the brain is more likely to generate novel solutions to problems during sleep when the problem has been consciously held before sleep. The hidden signal responds to genuine inquiry. It works on what you bring to it with real attention. Whatever form you choose, the principle is the same. Bring something real to the threshold of sleep. Bring your genuine attention, your genuine questions, your genuine emotional truth. Not the noise of the surface, but the signal of what actually matters. Hand that to the hidden process and let it work. And then, in the morning, in the first minutes after waking, practice what might be the most undervalued act of consciousness available to you. Do not immediately return to the surface. The transition from sleep to waking is a threshold moment of extraordinary sensitivity. In the first minutes of waking, the brain is still in a transitional state, still carrying some of the neurochemical signature of sleep, still holding the connections that were made in the night before the stabilizing neurotransmitters of waking consciousness fully reassert the architecture of the habitual self. This transitional state, sometimes called the hypnopompic state, is a brief window in which the hidden signal is still accessible to waking awareness. Most people immediately close this window. They reach for their phones. They check the news. They begin reviewing the day's obligations. They flood their awareness with the stimulation and demand of the surface world, and the fragile, newly made connections of the night are drowned before they can be noticed, before they can be recorded, before they can be integrated into waking consciousness. But if you lie still for 5 minutes after waking, if you resist the pull of the surface world and instead direct your attention inward, toward whatever is present in your awareness in those first moments, you will begin to notice things, fragments of dreams, emotional residues that don't attach to any specific memory, wordless knowings, unexpected connections between things you've been thinking about, solutions to problems you went to sleep holding. These are the artifacts of the hidden signal, the traces of the night's work that are still present in the transitional state before waking consciousness fully reasserts itself. Notice them. Write them down. Not with analysis, not with immediate interpretation, but simply with documentation. Let them exist in your waking awareness before the surface world claims your attention. Over time, as you develop this practice, you will begin to recognize patterns in what comes through, recurring themes, consistent directions, the shape of what your hidden signal is working on. And you will begin to understand that the hidden signal is not random. It has a coherence. It has a direction. It is oriented towards something. The ancient traditions had a word for this orientation. The Vedic tradition called it dharma, not in the simplified sense of duty, but in the deeper sense of the inherent nature and direction of a being. The way a river has an inherent direction that is not chosen, but is nonetheless real. The Taoist tradition called it the way of the Tao, the natural unfolding of what is most deeply aligned with the underlying principle of reality. The shamanic traditions called it the soul's path, the direction that was visible from the hidden layer even when it was obscured at the surface. What the hidden signal of sleep is oriented toward is the deepest version of what you are, not the surface version, the version constructed from conditioning, from social expectation, from the accumulated habits of a life lived primarily at the surface level of experience, the version that exists beneath all of that, the version that is most coherent with the quantum field of possibility that underlies your neural architecture, the version that the ancient traditions were pointing at when they described the journey of the bar through the duat, the return of individual awareness to prajna, the shaman's retrieval of soul fragments from the hidden world. The hidden signal is not just reorganizing your memories. It is not just solving your problems. It is orienting you, night by night, layer by layer, through the nightly renovation of the instrument of your consciousness, toward the version of reality that is most deeply aligned with what you most fundamentally are. This is the deepest layer. This is the core truth that all the other layers were concealing. Let me say it directly, because it deserves to be heard without the buffer of metaphor. You are not the surface version of yourself. You are not the person constructed from the accumulated conditioning of your waking life. The beliefs you were taught, the identity you were assigned, the model of reality you inherited from the culture you were born into. That version of you is real, and it matters, and it is the layer through which you navigate the visible world. But it is not the deepest version. It is not the most real version. It is the surface layer. Beneath it, operating every night while your conscious awareness is offline, there is a process of extraordinary intelligence, a process that has been running since the first night of your life, that has been working with information you never consciously processed, making connections you never consciously made, building a model of reality that is deeper and more accurate than anything your waking mind has constructed. A process that is oriented with a precision that your waking consciousness can barely approach, toward the version of you that is most fully alive, most fully coherent, most fully aligned with the quantum field of possibility that underlies your existence. The hidden signal of sleep is not something that happens to you. It is something you are doing at the deepest level of what you are every night. It is the most fundamental act of self-creation available to a biological being. It is the process by which the quantum field of what you could be is continuously being sampled and written into the physical structure of what you are. And it has been happening every night of your life, without your knowledge, without your participation, without your awareness. Until now. Now let's talk about what changes when you know this. Because the knowledge of the hidden signal is not merely interesting, it is transformative. Not in spite of being knowledge, but because of the specific kind of knowledge it is. When you understand that your waking experience of reality is generated by a neural architecture that is being nightly rebuilt through a process you cannot consciously direct, something fundamental shifts in your relationship with that experience. The things you were certain about, the fixed beliefs, the settled assumptions, the things you accepted as simply the way things are, reveal themselves as outputs of a dynamic system rather than reflections of a static reality. They are not wrong, necessarily, but they are not final. They are the current configuration of an instrument that is capable of being reconfigured. This is not destabilizing, it is liberating. The version of reality you are experiencing right now, the version that feels solid and fixed and final, is the output of a neural architecture that has been shaped by every experience you've had, every night of sleep you've slept, every signal that has been processed and integrated and written into the structure of your brain. It is the result of an extraordinary process, but it is not the only possible result. It is one configuration of a system that is capable of an enormous range of configurations, and the process that determines which configuration you inhabit is the hidden signal that runs every night. When you begin to work consciously with this signal, when you begin to bring genuine attention, genuine questions, genuine emotional truth to the threshold of sleep, and when you begin to receive what comes back across the threshold of waking, you are not hacking the system. You are participating in it. You are adding your conscious awareness to a process that has been running without it. And the result of that participation is a more coherent, more directed, more rapidly evolving version of the nightly renovation. The ancient traditions understood this as the difference between ordinary sleep and what they called conscious sleep. Not lucid dreaming in the contemporary entertainment sense, but a genuine quality of awareness that could be brought to the sleep state and that transformed the nature of what occurred there. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition developed an entire practice called dream yoga, not for the purpose of controlling dream content, but for the purpose of maintaining the continuity of awareness through the sleep state, so that the wisdom accessible in the hidden layers of consciousness could be brought back into waking life with greater clarity and completeness. The Vedic tradition described the practice of yoga nidra, literally the yoga of sleep, as a method for accessing the state between waking and sleep, the hypnagogic threshold, as a space of direct contact with the deepest layer of consciousness. Not as a relaxation technique, though relaxation was a byproduct, but as a genuine practice of consciousness exploration. The shamanic practice of dream work, the deliberate cultivation of relationship with the dream state as a source of guidance, healing, and knowledge, was not peripheral to shamanic practice. It was central. The shaman's ability to navigate the hidden layers of reality depended on the development of a specific quality of relationship with the sleep and dream state. These traditions were not primitive attempts to explain what they didn't understand. They were sophisticated maps of a territory that modern science is only now beginning to instrument. They were pointing at the hidden signal and saying, "This matters. This is where the most important work of consciousness happens. This is where you can make contact with the layer of reality that generates the surface you are living on." And they were right. Let me take you into one more story, one more parable, because there is a layer of this truth that I want to reach you through narrative, and I want to reach it before we go to the deepest integration. There was a man named Elias who had spent his entire adult life building things. He was an engineer by training and a builder by temperament. Someone who understood the world in terms of structures, systems, and the logic of how things fit together. He was very good at this. The things he built were solid and precise and lasted. But Elias had a problem that no amount of engineering skill could solve. He had been trying for years to understand something about his own life, a pattern he could see clearly in retrospect, but could never seem to interrupt in the present. He would build something, a project, a relationship, a version of his life, with great care and precision, and it would work beautifully for a while, and then something would shift, and the thing he had built would begin to develop cracks that he couldn't find the source of. He would try to repair the cracks, and the repairs would hold for a while, and then new cracks would appear somewhere else. He had been doing this for so long that he had begun to suspect the problem was not with what he was building, but with the ground he was building on. He talked to engineers, he talked to therapists, he talked to teachers of various kinds. Everyone gave him useful information about the surface of the problem, about the patterns in his behavior, the habits in his relationships, the tendencies in his decision-making. He understood all of it. He applied all of it. The cracks kept appearing. Then one evening, at the end of a particularly difficult week, he did something he had never done before. Instead of reviewing the week's events, analyzing what had gone wrong, planning how to do better next time, instead of all the surface-level work he normally did with his evenings, he simply sat. He sat with the question of what was beneath the cracks, without trying to answer it. He held the question the way he might hold a stone, feeling its weight, its texture, its temperature, without trying to do anything with it. And then he went to sleep. He woke in the night from a dream that he immediately knew was significant, though he couldn't have said why. In the dream, he had been in the basement of a building he was constructing, and he had found beneath the basement floor a layer of ground that was not the solid foundation he had assumed was there, but a layer of compressed sediment that had been deposited over something much older, something that was not inert but was slowly, almost imperceptibly, moving. Not moving enough to be visible at the surface, not moving enough to be detected by the standard surveys he would have done before construction, but moving enough, over time, to create the pattern of cracks he had been trying to repair for years. He lay awake for a long time after the dream. He was an engineer. He knew what the dream was showing him in engineering terms. The foundation he was building on was not stable, not because of anything wrong with his construction, but because of something moving in the hidden layer beneath the foundation itself. But he also knew, with a clarity that surprised him, that the dream was not only about engineering. It was about something in him, something in the deepest layer of his own architecture that was moving in ways he had never detected because he had never looked beneath the foundation. Something that had been there long before he began building. Something laid down in the earliest years of his life, in the deepest sediment of his formation as a person, that was slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifting in a way that was generating the cracks in everything he built on top of it. He didn't know what that something was, not yet, but for the first time he knew where to look. Not at the surface of his behavior or his relationships or his decisions, beneath the foundation, in the hidden layer. It took him several years to fully excavate that layer, years of the kind of work that cannot be done quickly, the slow, careful work of attending to what came through in the threshold moments of sleep, of noticing the patterns in his dreams, of sitting with questions in the evenings rather than analyzing them, of learning to receive what the hidden signal was showing him rather than trying to direct it. Years of building a relationship with the part of himself that operated beneath his conscious awareness. What he found there was not what he expected. It was not a wound or a trauma in the conventional sense, though there were those too. What he found, at the deepest layer, was something more like a direction, an orientation that his deepest self had been trying to move in for his entire adult life, that was incompatible with the structures he kept building on top of it. Not because the direction was wrong, because the structures were. Because he had been building a life according to the plans he had been given, the plans that made sense from the surface, rather than according to the direction that was moving in the hidden layer. When he finally understood this, when the hidden signal had finally communicated clearly enough, and he had finally learned to receive it clearly enough, he stopped trying to repair the cracks. He stopped building on the old foundation. He began to build something different, something that was aligned with the direction he had found in the deep ground. The new things he built didn't crack, not because they were more carefully constructed, because they were built on a foundation that was aligned with what was moving beneath it, rather than in tension with it. You have a direction in your deep ground. The hidden signal has been trying to show it to you every night. Tonight, you begin to receive it. Now let's integrate everything we've excavated in this transmission. Because we've gone through many layers, and the work of integration is the work of letting all those layers become a single coherent understanding, rather than a collection of separate insights. Here is what we've found, layer by layer. At the surface, sleep is rest and recovery, accurate but incomplete. Beneath that, sleep is a nightly process of neural restructuring, driven by a precisely timed, hidden signal, the nested oscillation system of slow-wave sleep that replays, compresses, and integrates the day's experience into the long-term architecture of the brain, while simultaneously using the glymphatic system to chemically reconfigure the brain's signaling environment. Beneath that, the hidden signal of sleep may operate not only at the classical level of electrical and chemical activity, but at the quantum level, at the level where the boundary between possibility and actuality is not yet fixed, where the brain is sampling the quantum field of what could be and writing it into the physical structure of what is. Beneath that, ancient wisdom traditions across cultures independently mapped this hidden process in their own language, describing the nightly contact with the generative ground of reality, the journey of awareness through the hidden layer of existence, the return to the source from which individual consciousness arises. Beneath that, the hidden signal is not merely reorganizing information. It is editing your model of reality, determining what stands out and what fades, what connections are made and what patterns are reinforced, what version of reality you will wake up into tomorrow. Beneath that, during REM sleep, with the stabilizing neurotransmitters of waking consciousness offline and the neurotransmitter of learning surging, the brain enters a state of maximum associative freedom and maximum plasticity, the state in which the most radical restructuring of the neural architecture occurs and in which the most novel connections are made. And at the deepest layer, the hidden signal is oriented. It is not random, it has a direction. The direction of the deepest version of what you are, the version that exists beneath the surface construction of the conditioned self, the version that is most coherent with the quantum field of possibility that underlies your existence. This is the integration. You are not a fixed self having experiences. You are a dynamic process of self-creation, and the primary site of that creation is the hidden signal that runs every night in the absence of your conscious awareness. The reality you experience is not given to you. It is generated by you, by the nightly renovation of the instrument through which you experience it. And that renovation can be worked with consciously at the threshold, moments of sleep and waking, in ways that direct it toward the deepest version of what you are. The surface version of you is not wrong. It is not an illusion. It is the current output of an extraordinary process, but it is not the final version. It is not the deepest version. It is the most recent configuration of a system that is capable of infinite reconfiguration. Every night, the hidden signal runs. Every night, the instrument is rebuilt. Every night, the quantum field of what you could be is sampled, and the result is written into the physical structure of what you are. You have been sleeping through this process your entire life, not literally, but in the sense that you have been unaware of it, uninvolved in it, not bringing your conscious awareness to the threshold moments where participation is possible. That changes tonight. Before we close this transmission, I want to offer you something to carry into the community, something to bring into the conversation with others who are here, who are doing this work of excavation, who refuse to stop at the surface. Here is the question I want you to sit with, and here is what I want you to bring back from the threshold of your next sleep. What is the direction in your deep ground? Not what you think you want, not what you've been told you should want, not the goals that make sense from the surface, the direction. The thing that has been moving in the hidden layer beneath everything you've built, that has been showing up at the edges of your awareness in the threshold moments of sleep and waking, that the hidden signal has been oriented toward for longer than you've been paying attention. You don't have to know the answer yet. You just have to hold the question. Bring it to the threshold of sleep tonight. Hand it to the hidden signal. And in the morning, before you reach for your phone, before you let the surface world reclaim your attention, lie still for 5 minutes and notice what is present. Drop in the comments what comes through. Not the analysis, the raw content, the fragment of dream, the wordless knowing, the unexpected image. Let's build a map together. Let's see what the hidden signal is showing this community when it's given the space to be heard. Because this is not a solitary excavation. The deepest layers of reality are not accessible only to individual consciousness. The ancient traditions understood this. The mystery schools, the dream circles, the shamanic communities were collective practices. The map of hidden territory is built by many explorers, comparing what they found. And this community is exactly that, a gathering of people who have decided not to stop at the surface, who are ready to go deeper together. If this transmission reached a layer in you that you've been looking for, if something in what we explored tonight resonated at a depth that the surface world rarely touches, share it with someone who is ready to look beneath the surface of their own life. Someone who has been sensing there is more beneath what they can see, but hasn't yet been shown where to look. Sharing this is not a small act. It creates a shared depth between two people. It gives someone access to a layer they were already sensing, but couldn't reach alone, and that contact changes both of them. And consider returning to this transmission in the quiet hours. Early morning before the day claims your attention, or the stillness before sleep. When the surface noise is lowest, and the deeper layers are most accessible. The hidden signal speaks most clearly when the surface is still. And stay with us, because what we explored tonight is one layer of a much deeper dig. Every transmission here goes further beneath the surface of what you thought you knew. Every layer we lift reveals a new layer beneath it. This is the work. Not a destination, but a direction. Not an answer, but an ever-deepening question. Here is the integration principle I want you to carry from this transmission. The hidden signal of your sleep is the most powerful instrument of self-transformation available to you. Not because you control it. You don't. Not because you can direct it. You can't. Not directly. But because you can participate in it. You can bring genuine attention, genuine questions, genuine emotional truth to the threshold of sleep, and you can receive what comes back across the threshold of waking with genuine openness and genuine curiosity. The practice is not complicated. It is not demanding. It does not require special equipment or special circumstances. It requires only a quality of attention, a willingness to treat the threshold moments of sleep as the significant moments they actually are, rather than the trivial transitions they appear to be from the surface. 30 minutes before sleep, turn away from the surface world. Bring your genuine attention to what actually matters. Hold a real question. Offer the hidden signal something real to work with. 5 minutes after waking, stay at the threshold. Don't immediately return to the surface. Notice what is present. Write it down. Let the artifacts of the night's work exist in your awareness before the day claims your attention. Over time, with this practice, you will begin to notice something. The quality of your waking experience will begin to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually and unmistakably. The things you were certain about will become more fluid. The things you couldn't see will begin to become visible. The direction in your deep ground will begin to make itself known more clearly, and the version of reality you inhabit will begin to move, slowly, precisely, with the intelligence of the hidden signal behind it, toward the version that is most deeply aligned with what you most fundamentally are. This is what the ancient traditions meant by awakening, not a sudden enlightenment, not a dramatic transformation, the gradual, systematic, layer-by-layer revelation of what was always there, hidden in plain sight, beneath the surface of the life you were living, waiting for your awareness to look deep enough to see it. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. What has been revealed in this transmission cannot be re-hidden. The hidden signal was always running. Now you know it is there. Now you know what it is doing. Now you know how to participate in it. And that knowledge, that awareness of the layer beneath the layer, changes the nature of every night of sleep you will ever have from this moment forward. You are no longer a surface dweller. You see the depth now. Every night, the hidden signal runs. Every night, the quantum field of what you could be is sampled and written into the structure of what you are. Every night, the instrument through which you experience reality is rebuilt, refined, and oriented toward the deepest version of what you are. You have been sleeping through this process. Now you are awake to it, and that is the beginning of something that goes deeper than anything the surface world has ever offered you. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. The next layer of this excavation is already waiting. The 0 point, what most people think of as emptiness or absence, is actually a hidden field beneath it that actively creates reality, and understanding what it is changes everything about how you understand the ground you are standing on. That transmission is here,